Hey everybody, welcome back to the most awkward web series on the internet by far. Today we're going to just review some of the notes that we discussed in class concerning conflict, and you can come back to this presentation throughout the year just to give yourself a refresher on the various types of conflict we discussed. Why am I focusing on conflict even this early in the year? Conflict is universal. Conflict is something that all men and women, have experienced throughout the time we have been on this planet. From the very beginning of human history, we are at conflict with each other, conflict with nature. Everything is trying to kill us. Conflict with ourselves. We're always battling our demons. We're always trying to do what's right, but having, the devil on your shoulder lead you astray from that. So one of the most basic forms of conflict we see is called man versus man conflict. That is a physical or philosophical confrontation between two human beings. Often some kind of physical altercation could happen, an actual fight. This is stuff you see in the hallway in every high school across the country. Man has been always at odds with itself. You have that piece of land, I want that land, I'm going to take it. Early civilizations developed technology that they used into weaponry. Why? To kill each other. So the most basic form of conflict that we talk about is man versus man conflict. Not much to say about that. It's pretty obvious. Second, really, really basic form of conflict, basic but also gets into some complex ideas about mankind, is man versus nature. We exist oftentimes surrounded by nature. We love living in the woods and on sides of beautiful hills and mountains and with views of nature. People go camping. People like to throw thousands of years of civilization out the window and live in a tent and potentially be eaten by bears. But just as long as people have appreciated the beauty of nature, it seems as if nature has been trying to kill us. Whether it's wild animals or lightning strikes or tidal waves or fires or earthquakes, the natural world seems out to get us. And if you watch the news, you hear about a ship lost in the angry sea. The sea was angry that night. We even personify nature. That nature has emotions, nature has feelings. Early, lots of poetry, not just early poetry. Nature and God were sort of thought of as the same thing. That nature was a manifestation of God's will, and if you were consumed by something in nature, well, you must have annoyed the wrong God or did something wrong. And it's an interesting type of conflict because as much as we like to believe we are civilized and we live in nice houses and we have technology, take human beings out into the woods, a few hundred yards from civilization, and all hell is going to break loose. And this theme is explored in Call of the Wild and Lord of the Flies, where these civilized people are brought into nature and descend into almost an animalistic way of life, where those rules of civilization break down almost immediately and to catastrophic consequences. People die. So it's funny to see just how thin the veil of civilization is when we place that civilization within a natural setting. It's just kind of interesting. So that's explored often in literature, is this thin shield between what man perceives as its civilized self versus the natural self. A novel like Heart of Darkness uses that darkness inherent in nature to symbolize man's soul, is that maybe our souls, our innermost personas, are like nature in some cases, chaotic, wild, dark, evil, unpredictable, and capable of terrible, terrible things. So keep an eye open for man versus nature in literature. It's one of the classic conflicts man has had with the known world. The next type of conflict is man versus society. Man versus society is, we're talking about it now with Colin Kaepernick, where a person has an idea that may go against the ingrained notions or the popular beliefs of the group of people, the community in which he lives, and the person decides he's going to stand up for that belief that isn't accepted, and he's going to make speeches or organize events. Martin Luther King, famously in Letter from Birmingham Jail, is being a person who's speaking for equality, for equal rights, for people to get off the fence and join the civil rights movement. And he is making the case that, if you're not making a decision to join, you're making a decision to fight against civil rights. So obviously, when we have conflict with society, we have to be careful because we know what happened to Martin Luther King. We know what happens when leaders stand for beliefs that perhaps the rest of the community doesn't believe or might offset the power struggle. Again, in Martin Luther King's case, why would a established white power community give up any of that power to blacks, even though in most cases, a lot of times the blacks in the community were the majority of the population, yet still had less power than the white community leaders. So oftentimes it becomes a sort of negotiation of how do we get some of that power from the dominant community into our community. So that's another theme that's going to be expressed often in literature. Next, we have man versus himself. Man versus self is the idea of the angel and the devil. Should I skip English class? The angel's telling you no, you might miss some valuable information that someday could be useful on your Regents exam, and the devil's saying, but it's going to be lit. Let's go get some sodas and skip English class. Rounds is boring anyways. Silly YouTube presentations. I'll just check them out if I want the notes. So man versus self. The conflict we have with, what we want in the immediacy versus planning for the future. This is, should I buy that new pair of shoes or should I put that $200 in the bank and accrue interest and so I can afford college textbooks? Again, very classic conflict. Most sort of in cartoons and in media symbolized by the angel and the devil. Finally, we have kind of the philosophical conflict of the bunch, and that's man versus his own fate. Man knows deep down in its soul that its time here on earth is finite, and that we are slowly progressing towards that end point. And what do we do in that time? Well, we fill our lives up with friendships and relationships and attachments to the community and pursuits of education and physical, material things and anything we can to make that time towards the finite endpoint pleasurable and pleasing. Why? Is it because deep down we acknowledge that that time is limited and we don't want to think about that? We want to avoid it. Sometimes we actively avoid what we know is our fate. Something's in store for you and you're going to fight against it. You're going to do everything you can. You're doing poorly in English class and your teacher might say, you're doomed to fail this course. And you might say, that's not true. I'm going to fight against this fate of failure and having to take this class again next year. I'm going to crack the books and study and come in and for extra time after school and email when I have questions. Scary thoughts here, but we have researchers who are using genetic technology that reads people's genes, and they can uncover probabilities of what you will die from and when. Do people want to know that? You're told that you have 31 years. I mean, would you change your life to try to prolong that? Of course, the wise ass answer that students say when I say, well, is it possible to fight against your fate? And the students are going to say, what if your fate is to fight your fate? Of course. This is going to manifest itself in all sorts of tragedy where, like, for example, in Macbeth, where the witches literally tell Macbeth his future. And he's down for it at first because the future favors him. He's going to be made king and, he's going to be wealthy and powerful. But soon the other aspects of the prophecy start to come true, and the the witch's promise to him doesn't seem so promising, and he decides at the end to fight against that fate. Rather than while his castle is besieged by his enemies, he asks for his armor. He says, "Fate, come into the list," and the list is a battle. He asks Fate straight up, "Let's do this. Let's dance." And well, it's a tragedy, so I'm not going to spoil the ending, but we sort of know how tragedies end for for our Shakespearean tragic heroes. So oftentimes, characters in tragedy, we as an audience see them progressing towards their tragic ending, and it's something that we like seeing them battle against it. We know inevitably it's not going to work, but we like to see them get dragged through broken glass and their bodies beaten, and those who are loved ones taken from them. They love, just seeing the misery that these characters experience. Maybe because the character started out as a jerk. Maybe the character started out as someone that wasn't a likable person. So there's this desire for us to see someone like that suffer. And again, we'll get into this a little bit more as the year progresses. But that sort of desire, or that favorable view of seeing other people suffer, making ourselves feel better almost at the pain of other people, laughing when people fall on the ice, watching Macbeth struggle against a prophecy he has no potential chance of overcoming. We like to see the suffering because, again, it's for 1 second the pain that we might be experiencing in our lives is finally unburdened from us and placed onto the shoulders of another character. And that theory is called catharsis theory, that our potential for violence and pain is momentarily extinguished when we see pain happening to other people. And that would be a theory of catharsis, which is really, really prominently at work in tragedy. We go to the theater. We know these are not going to be happy stories, but we go anyway to see these characters suffer. Some of these new genres of horror movies, like the Saw movies, for example. What are these movies but just the audience watching these terrible people have to dig through broken glass and get stuck with syringes and burned and incinerated and tortured, and the subconscious desire to witness that comes from this need for other people to experience pain. It's the reason why if we had a bad day at school, your English teacher had a pop quiz that you failed, you didn't read the book, you forgot your math homework, your girlfriend's making out with somebody at the locker room that isn't you, your favorite Jordans got covered in mud. Well, it might be nice to go home and turn on some Grand Theft Auto first person and put on invincibility God mode and just mow down pedestrians on the street. Why? Well, it's nice for that moment to take the pain of the world off your shoulders and inflict it on many, many other people. So those are the 5 types of conflict: man versus man versus nature, man versus society, man versus self, and man versus his own fate. So again, keep this video in mind as Regents approach, and on the Regents exam, you'll have a section that's going to ask you how a theme is expressed using writing strategy and why that's significant. And what's going to make your response better than other people's is you're not only going to be able to discuss conflict, you're going to say that the reason why conflict is so important here is because conflict is so universal to the experience of mankind on this planet. We have always experienced conflict. Life is conflict. That is something, on one hand, that's terrible, but on the other hand is kind of beautiful. It's one thing that unites me and the viewer to someone living in France in the 17th century, to someone living in any epoch of time across history and location and geography. That conflict does unite us. Life is pain, life is suffering. What is literature? Literature is an expression of that pain and suffering rendered in an aesthetically pleasing way. Beautiful language. Literature actually makes conflict beautiful. So that's kind of your default answer sometimes on the Regents exam. is that the author is choosing to characterize this person as experiencing conflict because it makes him a universal human being. It makes him just like us. It makes him just like everybody who's ever existed. All right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the Regents exam.